Afternoon. My name is Herman. Along Shaylin, we are the co-chairs of this April Emergency Preparedness and Response Committee meeting. Thank you for joining. We'll give it a minute while others join before we get started. Well, good afternoon. Again, this is Herman. Why don't we get started and do a round of introductions? Again, my name is Herman. Alongside me,
Shaylin. Hi, everyone.
and we are co-chairs of this Emergency Preparedness and Response Committee. Why don't we hear from others joining from the Pacific time zone or Alaska time? We hear from folks in Mountain time. See, the one time I start on the other side and we don't have folks joining us from the western parts of the country. Folks in Central time.
This is Beth James. I'm in Jackson, Tennessee. I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you, Beth.
Yes, hi. My name is Herschel Jackson, and I'm with Center Rock Independent, and I'm in Central Rock, Illinois.
Thank you, Herschel.
Hi, I'm Lonnie Baker from Stone Hayes Center for Independent Living in Galesburg, Illinois.
Thank you, Lonnie. Seeing Jesse Gilpatrick from the Center for Independence in Marysville, Washington. We do have some folks from the Pacific time zone. Thank you, Jesse. Others in Central time? And folks in Eastern time zone.
Sorry, I'm Adam Burnett. I'm with Resource Center for Independent Living in Osage City, Kansas.
I'm Carol Tutz. I'm Carol Tutzke with the Department of Health and Human Services in Concord, New Hampshire.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Carol. And others that haven't had a chance to identify themselves.
Alexandra Enders, Missoula, Montana.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Hello, it's Teresa Frank. With this time change, I don't know what time zone I'm in, but I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Thank you, Teresa.
This is Abby Ritter, the Youth Advisory Specialist for April, and I'm calling in from Worcester, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Abby. Also seeing Lisa Sullivan from the Disability Network in West Michigan. Thank you, Lisa.
Hi, my name is Kelly Hickman. I'm from Services for Independent Living in Northeast Ohio.
Thank you, Kelly. And also thank you, Todd, Todd Holloway from the Washington State Center for Independence, and CEP, the Coalition for Inclusive Emergency Planning.
Thank you, Raman.
Thank you, Todd. Well, before we get started, we thought we'd had not too big of a group, but thank you all for joining. Currently, the National State Independent Living Council is having their conference in Arkansas. We do have many colleagues there as well. And thank you all for joining us today. We always ask, is anyone going or have unmet disaster-related needs in their communities?
No.
This is Carol from New Hampshire. We got inundated with yet another round of, they have a name for this, but it's flooding on the seacoast when, astronomical high tide. I knew it would come to me. And over the weekend, and many of the homes that I've talked to for individual assistance are, trying to clean up yet again. So housing continues to be an issue for some of our residents with disabilities, and especially some of the senior older adults that I've been talking to, but nothing that can't be taken care of. So I just thought I would bring that point up. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and glad to hear that locally you can address it. Let's hear from Jim, but then I'd like to come back to you and hear more about how are you addressing it. But I do want to give the floor to Jim.
Well, two things. I do have some requests for some information in regards to the Disaster Relief Recovery Center. I don't know, for the interpreter, it's kind of fuzzy for me, but I want to refer them to the center, and I have some people there that I'd like to get you connected with. That would be great. And the second thing is, I did get a response from somebody in the community that one guy was stuck. He has a power chair and the battery went out and he's stuck. So how can I have someone ran to go help him? Is that the sales responsibility to go and help an individual that has that issue, or what is the best way to address that situation? It's more of like an individualized situation. It's not a mass situation or anything like that, but yeah, what would be the best way to approach that? I do have a meeting this week to discuss that problem.
This is Raman. Thank you for asking, Jim. A couple of thoughts come to mind, but I want to check if anyone has anyone they want to ask or provide input.
Herman, this is Todd. Jim, thanks for bringing that up. This is an issue that is becoming more and more common, and it has a lot to do with the responsible parties. When you dial 911, someone may have, in this case, a power chair on the side of a very busy road, and the public is more than normal taking it upon themselves to try and help people in these circumstances, because fire, rescue, and police often won't respond. So this is an area where we see this happen a lot more when there is a disaster, but now we're starting to see it much more often, even when there is not a disaster.
This is Raman. Thank you for that additional information, Todd. Okay, I'll continue. Well, first, it's not the sales responsibility, ultimately, right? That is not charged with that activity as one of the 5 core services. With that, there are some centers for independent living that do either, I don't know if actively, but over the years, I know that some have had a paratransit contract. And I'll say more about that. Some sales do have some accessible vehicles that if they have a driver on call or available, and there's no one else that could, and they are a consumer or person with disability, maybe they still, out of the goodness of their heart, because it is the right thing to do, can support the person if it's within their power, right? With paratransit, I think one solution that could be looked at is meeting with your mayor's office. So they assign someone to call a meeting with your transportation authority. So you're meeting with more than just the transportation authority, and present the problem and discuss the solution of, yes, we understand that paratransit, you have to be ADA and apply and go through the doctor's note and conditional or unconditional. But here's the reality. And there are people that need this service, and otherwise they are going to incur additional costs to the city if they, right, are heat exposed, cold exposed, accrue health problems for not being able to have the support they need in emergency rooms and other costs. So create a line where people could call in, and yes, there will be a much longer wait than traditional because it will be in between availability, but there are accessible drivers with vehicles in the streets in some parts of the country where paratransit allows to support the individual and troubleshoot this.
I will bring that up to the meeting with our transportation people. We do have that situation, but I will bring that information forward and see what they discuss and come up with.
This is Raman, and I'll add that in Philadelphia, I know that Uber and Lyft have some accessible vehicles, and they have contracted an amount with the transportation authority to support paratransit need. So just an additional food for thought.
Yeah, I was thinking something like AAA type of thing for wheelchairs. Like if the wheelchair breaks down, they can go ahead and call someone to come out and charge them, give them a battery charge or something like that. I'm just thinking, about different things.
Thank you, Jim. Todd?
Thanks so much, Herman, and thank you, Jim. I'll be in that meeting with you on Friday. One thing I think
Sure.
for the purposes of our group here and the never-ending battle to try and find equity in rural transportation, we need to raise our level of education with first responders and others, like you say, Herman, with mayors and city councils and county councils, that it needs to be looked at in a different way. People who have a power chair or something along those lines, or even a manual wheelchair that becomes immobile, is a person who just lost their legs. That's the way this needs to be looked at. Looking at it as a mechanical failure is a failure on our part to get the message across properly. I think we need to impress upon people that if somebody was walking down the street and was suddenly hit by a car and was injured and may not be life-threatening but cannot no longer move, we would address that immediately. But they do not do that here, and I think we've got to find a way to come to some kind of agreement, especially in rural communities where it could be a matter of life and death very quickly, to be able to get a good 911 first responder response to this situation.
Yes, thank you.
And Carol adds in the chat, does the city own or does the city or town have a refurbished equipment marketplace, such as generally used medical equipment?
Well, I know that they do have several around, several places. Todd is aware of those places. They are the Knights of Columbus. It's they have hospital equipment that they can hospital equipment loan program. The Knights of Columbus do help, and all over the state. I mean, they could possibly, but I mean, the situation is more of an immediate need type of thing. You know, they're in their wheelchair, it breaks down on the road. I mean, they might need somebody to come out there and, you know, give them a charge and get them out of the way and make them safe, get them out of danger.
And I would agree completely with Jim's take on that. We do have a list of current agencies and organizations that repair assistive technology and who provide durable medical equipment that has been for reuse purposes. And I encourage everyone on this call to connect with your regional disability integration specialist within FEMA and your local folks that partner with them in emergency management to be sure that you have a list like that for steady state opportunities to help someone get their, in this case, legs back. But Jim, that this is an emergent situation where we need to have somebody act before there's injury or loss of life.
Yes, exactly.
This is Raman. Thank you both. And this is when you also mentioned, Todd, connecting with your FEMA Regional Disability Integration Specialists, and we put a link in the chat with their names and their contacts throughout each region in the country. And if you have difficulties connecting with your artist, don't hesitate to contact us and we can facilitate an introduction. Carol, if you don't mind, you had mentioned right, that housing needs was something you were noticing from the ongoing flooding, and that you're finding solutions. And housing is a need across the country, so pervasive and especially accessible housing. What solutions that you could share you're coming up with?
I'll be flat out honest. Housing is going to continue to be an issue for us, no matter how hard we try to make this work. It's more of connecting social services with individuals that helps to spread the word and identify potential areas that might be useful. And so to give you an example, one of the the clients I had for individual assistance. She's a single mother, and her two young sons under the age of 12. Both the sons and the mother have are on the spectrum. And just, walking her through the various resources within her social network and identifying where there might be additional resources that she may not have thought of. And taking the time to do that level of case management, has become beneficial in some ways. When incidences where people whose house has been flooded and they cannot be in there because of the damage to the home or toxicity of the floodwaters, Red Cross here in New Hampshire will give them a stipend to stay at a hotel motel to help until they can help get their feet back up. And the case manager assigned to the client, they too will utilize their network to identify additional resources for them. As I've said in other national calls, we all can benefit by, having more representation from housing officials on our calls, whether it's within the town, municipality, county, state, or even at the national level, having HUD on the calls to help with this, or at least to hear the issues that we are still dealing with. It's a challenge, and I admit that it's going to continue to be a challenge, but I remain firmly grounded that the more we know about our social services and what is out there in the community, the better we are set to help individuals. Thank you.
Carol, this is Todd, and I couldn't agree with you more. I just on Friday was with a Tacoma Area Commission on Disabilities, where there is a project to work on visitability, something we're all very familiar with, but most of the community is not. And what we're trying to do with our planners, who have really been the instigators, this is a very rare situation, I believe, for the city of Tacoma to actually take on universal design as an issue and make it part of building codes for our area. But what I'm finding is that with the education you're talking about, Carol, that people are, and including developers, are more keen to see the win-win for everyone. The costs going down, the availability to be able to then sell or rent units. These things are really becoming more normalized. And as you pointed out, there's no time like right now to be doing this, because housing is bad for everyone. If we're going to be looking to refurbish, redesign, remodel, or build new housing, taking universal design and visitability into account, this is the time to do it. So I could not agree with you more. I think this is not only something that we need to address at a larger national level, that's obvious, but this is definitely something we have to look from city councils, county councils, as well as our state legislators, which is the next move for the city of Tacoma.
This is Raman. Thank you, Carol, and for that feedback. Todd, any questions or additional feedback?
Love to, this is Todd. I would love to hear from others on the call who could talk to the level of, or the percentage of disability that they're seeing within the people who have no fixed abode, as they say in England, no fixed address. in their communities, from the rural parts of Montana and others to anyone who may be in a city in a more rural setting. I everywhere I talk to, the percentages of people affected that have disabilities is astronomical. And I'm just wondering what you're hearing where you're at.
And while this is Herman, while folks are coming off mute and finding their mute buttons, Jim shares in the chat regarding universal design and accessibility policies, which states provide incentives to increase housing units with accessibility features? And I don't have that answer in front of me. I don't know if others do, but I could ask colleagues at the National Low Income Housing Coalition who can help us with this question. This is Hermano. Do I have a shy bunch today, or folks are truly pondering on your question, Todd? Carol shares a very good question. That is the kind of data that is needed to show policy developers. You repeat the question, Todd?
Absolutely, Herman, this is Todd. And I was just curious if people are aware in your communities. I know there are usually point in time counts for people who may be unhoused or living in circumstances where it's not their fixed address. And my curiosity was to the percentage of those folks that are part of those counts, what percentage of them have disabilities. And I say that because in the past, when I volunteered to do point in time counts, I ran into a unique circumstance where people in, say, in a daily feeding environment where a lot of people come in to get supplies and to have a meal. I was in the count and had people reluctant to tell me that they had a disability because of the very, in my view, fact policy for Social Security to cut their income by a third for being unhoused. So to me, I think it's one of those areas where we need to be careful how we ask the question and be very forthcoming that that data is not going to be on the questionnaire, but also just trying to find out what percentages are actually exist out there. And I think you're right, Herman, on a large scale, the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition and the National Low Income Housing Coalition will be a great resource. I'm just trying to see if there's anybody thinking outside the box in their community on how to find strategies to this. Hey, John. You're on
John,
mute,
you're
John.
muted currently.
I'm sorry. I was on the teleconference call and I couldn't get heard there. So, yeah, Todd, you've been sharing some great ideas. And one of the things we're doing here in Montana is what's so important with these initiatives, I'll call them initiatives right now because they're really in the early stage of happening, is bringing together sort of town hall meetings in which stakeholders can participate and communities can come together. When I say stakeholders and I talk about communities, I talk about people who, the NGOs, I talk about the government, I talk about concerned citizens, and even the private sector where planning can be done. FEMA has a program, specific program called Empowered Communities Program. They call it ECP. This is something that was done in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, years back, where communities would come together and actually plan for resiliency. The idea of these meetings is to bring together stakeholders in the community and start a conversation, put together what is called an RAP, which is a resilient action plan. And in the case of high stress events, this is something we want to do at Disaster Central because we see, I happen to be as executive director of Disaster Central. We want to see technology play a bigger role, which we can bring in remote caseworkers for areas that have been targeted in disasters or impacted by disasters, and actually have remote caseworkers. That is very feasible. The technology is out there where if you go to our website, you can find out a little bit more about sort of the workflows in a situation like that. But I think what's very important in situations like this are bringing communities together early on in building what are called resilient action plans. So there won't be the capability gaps or the situations where unmet needs occur, and the real work has to be done beforehand to organize these resilient action plans. And because we all know that just basically disasters, I think the last figure was every 10 days we're having a disaster in this country in one place or another. So planning is the key, and building resilience in communities. Anybody who would like to reach out to me and learn more about that, we're doing town hall meetings, and we're going to start with our first one actually next week. And so reach me at, I'll put it in my contact information in the chat. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, everyone. Thank you, John. Other thoughts or feedback for
Hi, this is Teresa from Baton Rouge. I can't comment on exact numbers or percentages, but I do know that our population here in the city in Baton Rouge and in New Orleans is growing for the unhoused. In Baton Rouge, the city will try and find them housing and move them from one place, and then they'll pop up in another place, and it's very disheartening. But I can't comment, like I said, on numbers or percentages, but we do know the population is growing based on the economy. That's it.
Sister Man? Thank you, Teresa. And seeing in the chat, Carol shared the coastal town of Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 2022 had 11% of the population of people 65 and up at the homeless shelter. In 2023, the number increased by 4% to 15% of the population. And Lydia shared, in our community, South Texas, we saw that COVID played a big impact on the increase of homelessness because with the cost of living increase that is currently in the market, we have people that were living at a fixed income and then the rent increased and they could no longer pay for their rent. I'm not sure of the actual percentage, but I can imagine that many of the communities we see in that population would be persons with disabilities. When we had the CARES Act funds, we assisted with rent and utility to address diversion services, but now we no longer have that funding, so it has become harder. Thank you for sharing, Lydia. Todd? And if you're talking, Todd, from me. Well,
Good
Todd,
afternoon, all.
good afternoon, Adelaide.
Afternoon, Adelaide. John, you had your hand up before me?
I see John put it down.
Oh, I apologize. No, I wanted to bring up something that is that hopefully will add steam to solving some of the homelessness crisis that we're facing, the housing crisis, period, is hand in hand with the climate crisis. I know Marcy Roth is going to speak as a keynote in Washington State next month to talk about the fact that now where it's not just the terms we hear like heat waves, it's also these deep cold below freezing snaps that we're seeing. These are becoming so common that they're not even classified necessarily as disasters, but they will cost human lives, especially if people don't have a roof over their head. So I think we need to equate the two very similarly. Especially for you folks in Montana on this even this warm winter we've had. There were times when the temperatures went far below zero in eastern Montana and in other parts of Wyoming and that part of the country. And we weren't even some of the worst hit on the West Coast. So we've got to start to equate the climate crisis and the housing crisis.
This is some good points, Todd, and it's going to be an ongoing need. I did briefly read through the President's budget for 2025 was released earlier today, and there are funds for housing and underserved and climate mitigation, but it's a drop in the bucket to what the real need is. But there are some funds, at least. And Lydia shares in the chat, I agree with Todd with climate issues in Texas when we had the freeze. Our state was extremely unprepared and it cost the lives of persons with access and functional needs. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Lydia. And folks that may want to connect with John, put his contact in the chat with the link to the website. Thank you, John. And Lucille shares in the chat, the situation in Delaware is the same as in your area of South Texas. What you wrote could have been written by me. Our SIL serves the south part of Newcastle County in Delaware, but I don't imagine the other SILs that serve the rest of the state. Delaware is much different. Thank you for sharing, Lucille. The housing crisis, yes, the housing crisis is something that we hear again and again, and displacing individuals from their communities, institutionalizing people, ultimately, especially in our community. So it behooves us to call attention to it everywhere we can. Thank you all. Carol shares, I definitely agree on incorporating climate crisis in the housing discussion. As mentioned, the astronomical tide has resulted in more flooding further into communities along the coast. At some point, people will need to make a decision to no longer build or live on the coast. And Mr. Raman, in the years to come, as sea level rises, this will be more and more impacting coastal communities across the nation and the world. Other thoughts or feedback? Any other local rising needs? We will share this conversation with April's advocacy committee to let them know of the just another example of the rising need and conversations happening across housing to see where we want to go in that direction. Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Cordova, and I work at the Independence Center in Colorado Springs. This is just a resource that you all may want to potentially listen to. It's an interview with Mayor Karen Bass, mostly because she talks about homelessness and people with disabilities and veterans who are also struggling to remain housed and keep their VA benefits. If you'd like, I could share the link to the interview in the chat. She was interviewed by Trevor Noah. He has a new podcast called What Now? But her initiatives that she's taking to help people who are experiencing homelessness is interesting. If you all want to listen to that, she's the mayor of Los Angeles.
This is Raman. Thank you for sharing, Maria. Absolutely, we could share that link and be happy to disseminate as well.
Awesome. I will throw that in the chat.
This is Todd Herman, and the other thing I would recommend, that is wonderful news and something that I definitely think we should all watch or listen to, Maria. Right now, Vance Taylor is probably wrapping up a individual and public assistance discussion and recovery for San Diego County. And I think that a lot of what people don't know about the program's change is going to be important for us to keep an eye on and understand and learn from as we go forward. So as we see more and more of these necessarily all catastrophic, but disasters nonetheless, with flooding and heat and wind, we need to be able to inform people what to expect when they go to a disaster recovery center, especially when it comes to the new changes that happen within individual and public assistance. And the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies has a lot of detail on that and actually has called for a lot of explanation. One of the reasons why Vance was probably doing that webinar today with FEMA. But I think as we go forward, I think the more people are informed, the more we can get our local emergency management involved with educating not only the public, but the key players at the community level. The more people are going to understand what it is that they're applying for and when to apply.
This is Raman. Thank you, Todd, and thank you for sharing those links, Maria. Can't wait to check it out. We're a fan of Trevor here. We like it. Thank you. Carol.
In addition to that line of thinking, Todd, my concern now is because we've had 3 back-to-back flooding incidences, 2 on the coast within 2 months. These are, I guess you would call them frequent flyers to the IA program or for any level of assistance. And it's sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's new. And I think the challenge moving forward, at least, I would venture from FEMA's standpoint is are they going to put a limit as to, well, you applied 2 months ago, for the same thing, you can't apply again. That's my fear. I would hope that's not the case, but I've never in my 20 plus years here in the state ever seen the level of flooding like this so soon, like back to back. And I guess that's just my concern moving forward with this
Hear,
climate
hear.
change crisis. So
This
thank
is-
you.
This is Raman, and to answer your question, Carol, FEMA is there are two parts to this timely because FEMA will be reforming their individual assistance program that activates upon a presidentially declared disaster that individual assistance has been requested by the governor. Sometimes there can be a presidentially declared disaster that only comes with public assistance, which does not, that is for government response and not individual housing assistance. So looking back, if there has been presidentially declared disasters, per disasters, even if it's a month or weeks apart, which does happen in California, in the South, across from Texas to Florida, Puerto Rico. We have examples of 3 weeks apart hurricanes sometimes. Irma and Maria a couple years ago, 5, 6 years ago. As one example. So that if you can demonstrate damages accrued per disaster, so they cannot disqualify you, regardless of how frequent flyer you may be. It is the impact per the disaster. Now, because you could only get reimbursed for damages that you could prove happened due to or caused by the disaster. However, after March 22nd, so at the end of this month, when the reform kicks in, people will be able to enhance their structures, their houses, areas that were not impacted but need reinforcement to become resilient. We have to see how that plays out, because it's a completely new program. And that's what I mean. We have to see how that will stress the system, specifically on frequent flyer individuals, because they do exist because they live in very disaster prone areas and with low economic infrastructure support. So simply put, they cannot deny you, and if they do, people should appeal, and it's upon
Here.
the damage caused per the disaster, and that's upon declarations before March 21st of this year. We will have to stress the system after to see how it plays out. And we've had these conversations with FEMA where they're like, we put all these reforms out. That is why the comment period will extend until July 22nd. And that may give the chance to go through some presidentially declared disasters and see how they are stressing the system.
This is Todd Herman. So what you're saying is that this will be a test period between the end of March and February, or I'm sorry, July.
That is correct. Alexander.
Yes, it was interesting to note when the Office of Disability Integration Coordinator talked to the partnership about this new accessibility initiative. It wasn't just the typical disability equipment related things. He even mentioned something like a whole house generator. That would, this person needs that because of their power reliance. That's something new for FEMA. That will be interesting to see if that actually plays out.
This is Raman. Thank you, Alexandra. We are putting a link in the chat with that meeting, community call with FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination Director Gillums on these reforms and how they will impact the disability community. Thank you, Alexandra. In
I
these,
think it'll be interesting to see if they'll go the extra step about charging a power wheelchair. Would they do the thing to your car alternator that will allow you to charge your wheelchair battery from the vehicle's power by running it on gas? I'm not talking about a hybrid or an electric vehicle. It'll be interesting to see how close to damage to the house this is going to have to be. It's like a ramp, certainly, that is needed, would not be, is outside the house, but it is connected. So it'll be interesting to see the testing of the system or not.
this is Herman. Thank you, Alexandra. And the piece of equipment that charges using the car vehicles, that's an inverter, and agreement. I do want to recognize there's been some comments in the chat. The bigger challenge Carol shares the state is that there's no presidential disaster and the individual citizen's impact falls shy of required threshold. That we find that often case as well. And John Romano shared more around his resilience action, about the action plans. And Lucille shared, we desperately need to increase emergency housing, whether because of disaster or life circumstances, that is accessible to people with disabilities for whatever reason. I'd like to hear ideas, solutions may be implemented on how to efficiently fill this need. The number of beds available versus the number of people needing emergency housing is pitiful. How can we equitably serve everyone in the community? And the whole community with like much desire with public input and interest is needed, and that often they're pulling interest, sadly, but so needed. We do want to make sure we share some upcoming events and topics.
This is Shaylin. Just one major one we want to highlight. I know we mentioned last month, but it is coming up now. This month on March 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, IL Network will be holding a webinar on understanding the role of independent living network before, during, and after disasters. We'll be talking largely about the newly released FAQ from the Administration for Community Living and how statewide independent living plans can work to add disaster or emergency related goals into your spills, SPIL, and as well as the work of Centers for Independent Livings and statewide independent living councils in disasters and emergencies. Our colleague Jim House, who was on the line earlier today, will be presenting alongside Beth Mayer from Florida Silk and Sarah Launderville from Vermont Center for Independent Living, showcasing some of their experiences and lessons learned and also highlighting that FAQ as we mentioned and addressing questions from folks as well. And one thing that we'll continue to discuss here in this emergency committee for April is also other thoughts or ideas of how folks can incorporate disasters and emergencies into your state plans on independent living as either a goal in itself, as an objective within its goals, and other ways to incorporate and start building upon or strengthening the work that you all continue to do before, during, and after disasters. So hope folks are able to join us for that webinar again, March 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It will be recorded, so we'll be sure to share far and wide the recording afterwards for anyone that cannot make it. And please don't hesitate to send questions or thoughts our way as we get near that date, or afterwards, or at any time. Any questions or reflections folks have had since maybe reviewing the FAQs?
I have, this is Todd, Shaylin, and I want to encourage everyone here with your associations with the independent living movement to join this. Too often I have conversations with emergency managers, local and to national. And what I hear in their frustrations about not being able to save everyone should really ring in our ears. This is an issue that if ACL is going to ask us what we need and how we want to interact with this, preparedness is an enormous part of what we can do as IL centers to make sure that the disadvantages our participants have are not as bad as they can and will be if we don't have planning and strategies in place. So absolutely, this is an opportunity to have ACL be that person at the federal government level and say we have to empower our independent living movement, the centers as well as the silks, to be able to step in and do what other community emergency managers obviously cannot. That it's not something they don't want to do, it's something that they cannot do, not without our assistance.
This is Raman. Thank you, Todd. And just in case, Jim, I do want to note you to the chat where Maria shares how to access transcriptions in the video. And Lydia shares in our sales mobility management program, we do mapping and travel training. We use a GIS system. We partner with our local emergency management department and pass on that information onto the GOS so that they know GIS, so that they know where the community people with disabilities may need evacuation assistance. And GIS, a geo information system. Thank you, Lydia. And all good work there. Well, as Shaylin said, if you have other ideas, please don't hesitate to send them our ways, or questions or things you would like more information around. And we hold these April emergency preparedness and response meetings the second Monday of every month. We will gather again April 8th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central. Thank you everyone for joining. You know where to find us in the meantime. And thank you, Lena, for making our space accessible today. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.